here. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I'll go down roll call here. We have Corbett, Dan, Susan, Neil from the town board, and Allison from town staff in taking the place of her counterpart. And we'll see if Susan shows up, but you're correct in what you said a little bit ago, Corbett, that we do not have a quorum, so there will be no voting unless Sarah shows up. As far as the agenda goes, does anyone have any comments on the agenda? I put some things down here that may or may not make sense in the order of them. I put the Crusher trail things down so that we could talk about that prior to budget recommendations, because I thought that might play into budget recommendations. We need to talk about the recommendations, which we do need to vote on next month to get to the board. There's the master plan walk around that happened last Friday, and then some to-dos going on with that. And then the CAPS project that's going on. Need to talk about that a little bit. The potential of PROSTAC OSAC combining or redefining or something there. And then look ahead on a few things. Is there anything else that we need to add for the agenda tonight?
I don't think so.
Okay. We will move forward then. I do not see anyone in the public online, so I don't think that we're going to have any public comment. The only public comment that I've seen recently has been kind of general things regarding the project at Zaharias, and people glad that didn't happen or isn't going to happen, they don't think, or something along those lines, as well as fence being painted and a few other miscellaneous little things, but I don't think anything that we need to deal with tonight. So if we're done with that, why don't we jump into Crusher Fine Trails. Dan, you have done a bunch of effort on this and put the Google map together and taken a bunch of pretty pictures and kind of thought through that. Have you done any more on that or had any more thoughts on that? I'm particularly looking at how do we wrap this up in some way, put some definition around it, and potentially look at some budget for it.
What I thought I could do is share the results of the survey that I posted to Facebook. So we didn't get a ton of participation, but we did get 34 responses. Actually, last time I looked at it, there was 30, so we got a few more responses since then. And there was also some interesting discussion on Facebook. I'm not sure if anybody looked at that. But the most interesting was probably the discussion about making trail connections along McCaslin that would go so like south of Colton and right next to McCaslin, the area that we've previously said is going to cost $2 million in terms of retaining wall. There was some question from residents about, and former committee member, about whether that cost could be less if it was not a concrete trail and if it was instead Crusher Fine. And that could potentially simplify, if that would actually make things cheaper, then it would also kind of solve the problem of not having Crusher Fine trail connections, if you consider that a problem. So I thought that was one interesting outcome of the community feedback from Facebook. But I think the main thing I wanted to show in here was, this was kind of just showing the likelihood that you'd use Crusher Fine side trails. I think the way I would summarize it is, we had relatively low participation, definitely didn't see any kind of mandate coming out of this. There was definitely some support, and there was like some, how much is it going to cost? Like budget type of concern questions that I said, we weren't prepared to answer yet. One of the things that I mentioned before, and I should actually pull up, let me pull up my map. I mentioned before that I was wondering if we should kind kind of optimize what we thought was the best in terms of existing crusher fine trail, or if we should try to specifically have an alignment through the center of town here. And I think part of what I would say from this first engagement is that I definitely didn't hear anybody saying, "Oh, I really want this to go by my house," or anything like that. So my sort of takeaway was that we should probably optimize for the routes that are already there, which would be the yellow ones in this picture. So I was kind of back to thinking, based on the responses from the survey and the relatively low participation, that this is probably one of the more interesting paths because it connects to this long stretch of crusher fine trail that's already there. And what I was talking before about that the resident mentioned was revisiting a trail right here through this area. And I think the area where it was going to be like $1 million retaining wall was right in here, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody remembers this in more detail than I do.
Yeah, I think
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and so whether if there's someone we could ask about, could we reduce the cost of this with crusher fine, and then basically do a crusher fine connection that would get us all the way up into here? I think that's an interesting thing to potentially revisit.
Isn't that where the big ravine is, like where we need to put some kind of bridge in?
Yeah. I think this is where the ravine is. And so, yeah, I don't really know much about it other than every time we've talked about it, we've said it's really expensive. There just was some pushback on that. And maybe it'd be good to revisit and make sure that the reason we thought it was expensive before wasn't because we were talking about a concrete path. Make sure that there's nothing that makes things easier if we're talking about crusher fine there.
Yeah, when we were talking about putting a trail in back in the day, it had nothing to do with concrete versus crusher fine. It was literally putting a trail in. And either way, you would need to be able to have folks traverse that ravine in there. And that's where you would have to have some kind of bridge that was costing the multi-million-dollar.
So it was the bridge that was millions of dollars and not the retaining work.
It was all of the work, right? But it was nothing to do with whether it was concrete or trail. You had to put something there to bridge the gap, regardless. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that they had talked about, which we really didn't explore too much, is to kind of bypass the ravine. So if you're coming up from the south, you would head towards Fire Station Park, I think that is, and then maybe cut over somehow that way.
Like around here or something? Maybe connecting in through here?
Yep, kind of like that. So it's because it was the piece that was going from McCaslin all the way up to Calmonte, where the yellow is. That's where the bridge had to be. And so if we could bypass that.
It's super steep there. I've walked there a few times. It's very, very steep. The map doesn't do it justice to what it really looks like.
Yeah, I really haven't explored this area much. So that would probably be a good next step, is just see if we could brainstorm any way to get, even if it was all the way back to here, if there's some way that we could get connected into this system and then get around this corner without having, a huge amount of work. I don't know if that's possible or not.
Is there any breaks in those houses along there to get over to a road or something? It doesn't look like there is.
Well, there's one right here.
Yeah, that's the only one.
I think there's one other one up here too.
So if we could get from McCaslin over to that concrete path, at least we'd be headed the right direction, it looks like.
You're saying if we could get like a connection to here?
Well, if we could get from the south all the way down on the south end of McCaslin up to there, at least we would, it seems like that would be a helpful thing anyway.
Uh-huh. We could have this place that's not connected here, but you'd have a roundabout way of getting there if you followed the road down and then reconnect to the trails up here. Is that what you're saying, Todd?
Right. Yeah. It just seems like that would give a path, because right now, if you're on that side of those houses trying to go down McCaslin, there's really nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Is there, for some reason, I thought there was like a bike lane, like over that bridge that traverses that ravine.
over like this bridge.
Are you talking about on McCaslin itself?
Yes, yes.
I mean, if I recall, there's a small bike lane that goes all the way down McCaslin up to the roundabout.
Right. I was just saying there is a way. It's not maybe the most desirable way, but there is a way currently to go to traverse that area if you wanted to go in the bike lane on McCaslin.
I see.
So are you thinking having a trail alongside McCaslin off the road, and then for that little short spot, jump on the bike lane, then jump back on a trail?
I think that's kind of what has been talked about in the past. If there wasn't a budget to, create a bridge that's separate over the
So
ravine.
go like
for-
somewhere down into here and then have this little stretch that goes along and then jump back out.
I'll tell you, that's really not a bike lane. It's just a tiny shoulder. And I would be very much against putting any person on a road on the tiny shoulder, especially at that 45-mile-an-hour speed limit.
That place is kind of, and you're coming around the curve there and it's a little bit of a blind corner. So yeah, it's a little scary maybe.
Well, and there's a reason why they put that speed limit, radar thing right there, because nobody does the speed limit.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, like when I'm thinking about going in this roundabout way here, I'm also sort of thinking this, it's not that much further to just come up here and then you got this existing trail you could connect into, that we could kind of leverage here as well. So that is almost making me think that this might be a better option, just having some paths next to the sidewalk. But
I think the one along McCaslin certainly long term would be the goal. I'm not sure right now if it's worth trying to do without being able to get across that ravine though.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, the other thing that we could do is just look at the feasibility of this part. And I think it would be interesting to know if this idea I had of, basically going outside the trees, like going partway up the hill, if that would actually work or if that would cost a fortune for reasons I don't understand. Because I think there are several places where the trees are too close to put it next to the sidewalk, but it might work to just go up the hill just a little bit. So, I mean, one thing we could do is just try to get a quote for how much this stretch would cost. And then that would essentially give us, it would just extend the Crusher Fine connection that we had down here up to Purple Park potentially.
I think like you talked before, I think it would be nice to look at how do we have a path that goes all the way from the new downtown Superior all the way down to the south part of town that you could get to on Crusher Fine.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially from the CenturyLink property all the way to up
Yeah.
towards 36.
So going back to this, the community survey, there was more support in general for, there were a few people that said they didn't care. There were a few that said they didn't want it. And then, so it was like 14-9 basically at the extremes, a few that didn't care and a few that were slightly favoring it. So, not enough to really make a decision one way or another definitively. I'd say there's definitely some support. I'm trying to think if I tried to summarize this in a spreadsheet. I didn't have all of the responses yet. This is my favorite one. This is a terrible idea. There were some extremes here, but most of the ones that were against it were it was concerns about expense. I didn't see. There was one that talked about they wanted paved trails only because they got goat heads in their tires. I think that was the main one that was not talking about expense when they were saying they didn't want it. So yeah, I don't know if I was going to try to summarize who wanted it based on the activities they were doing. I think I think you could make a case that, like, if you look at the bottom of here, these are the ones that wanted it because it's sorted by the likelihood of use. And so it looks like the density of runners is more, which is kind of what you'd expect. The walkers maybe didn't care quite as much. And the bikers, if anything, wanted more concrete. So kind of what you'd expect. Relatively small sample size, but that's probably all that I got out of the survey. So,
Well, in addition to your survey, I've talked to quite a few people, particularly runners, and so I guess I haven't taken a good cross sample because I've just talked to people that are runners, and certainly all of them are very much in favor of doing anything we can to get more crusher, anything softer than concrete, basically.
mm-hmm. Looks like the dog walkers tended to like it as well.
Yeah, I'd echo what Todd said. I mean, I've heard the same thing, and it's also not just it's not a binary crusher versus concrete. I think a lot of folks have told me they prefer asphalt because even asphalt's softer than the concrete. Obviously, we have problems with that, but anything to kind of soften the blow to the knees.
So how do we want to move forward on this? Are we at a place where we want to contemplate having this be part of a budget recommendation? Do we want to ask for quotes on things like you suggested, Dan? What do you think should be next steps?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think we have to ask for quotes before we could ask for budget, probably, right? Mm-hmm. Because I don't really know what we're asking for yet in terms of cost. But for me, if it's not a lot of cost to get a quote, I would like to know how much we'd be talking about to add along the, to basically extend through this area that we're showing here in this part of McCaslin.
My first question is, though, essentially what we're looking to do is potentially add additional trails parallel to existing trails. Say it that way. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if maybe this is best, and I'm just thinking aloud here, there's something that we might want to work in association with our trail rankings, right? Because, I mean, to me, it's now, I'm starting to think, well, if I had a choice between adding crusher fine to an existing trail or adding a new trail, what would be more important if I had to pick one or the other? And so I would want to be able to kind of weigh those two things together in terms of opportunity.
Yeah, very much agreed, Corbett. That was going through my head at the same time of how do we put this in the mix of things? It's not exactly added into the trail ranking list as it exists today.
So maybe that's all we should do for now is add it to the trail ranking list for next year and basically have it ranked along with the rest of the trails.
Would we be ranking the concept of additional crusher fines with specific trails, or would we put in specific crusher fine trails in the ranking?
I'd suggest we put in specific crusher fine trails. Like, I would like go back to, this is the one that probably makes the most sense to me. And so I'd just probably put that one in. And if, unless other people think other crusher fine trails would make more sense to do next. With the idea that if this one had a lot of support, then, maybe we can talk about some of these other ones that aren't quite as clear that they would, be as useful or as helpful as that one.
Did you get any feedback on your survey as far as what trails on your map specifically would be used the most? Or not? No,
really? I didn't really. I was hoping to get, what I was thinking is that, some of the people that lived in this section of town would say, hey, I'd like one through here. I didn't see anything like that. I saw one comment saying, don't put it through here. That's really it. That's the only thing I got about location. Other than the comments about, on Facebook about trying to do a connection through here.
Right. So the trail that you're suggesting we get a quote on at this point is based on sort of ease, kind of low hanging fruit, or what do you thinking that.
Yeah, again, it's my guess about ease, and I could be wrong about that. So that's why what I'd just like to know is, because if we find out that this trail would be really hard to do for reasons that I don't understand, then that would mean that this whole path is probably not the right thing to do. And I would say it's kind of back to the drawing board. But if the quote came back and said, yeah, this would be, single digit dollars per meter or whatever, however they budget it, and it would be this amount of money, then maybe it would make sense to put this on the amenities list. And
Just a question. In the beginning when we were doing the trails list, we did have dollar amounts tied to it. And then more recently, in the last couple of years, that constraint went away to where we were just kind of ranking what was the best rank, not taking a dollar amount into consideration. And if you're going to put it back into the trails list, do you need that quote?
Mm-hmm. Well, to me, it kind of goes back into what Corbett was saying. If we're judging whether we want a new trail or whether we want to add a crusher fine side trail, it probably would be important to know, are we going to spend more for the crusher fine side trail than we would for a brand new trail somewhere else?
Well, if the trail, sorry.
Go ahead, Allison.
I was just thinking, if the trail was to be concrete and didn't have a lot of slope, those are all variables. And in the past, we had all of the trails quoted out, and that was something that went away, which was interesting. So it was just me thinking,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a good point, Allison, and one that we need to maybe revisit in thinking about at least how we rank things so that we know. Because right now, if you were to ask maybe any of us what things would cost if we said, yes, we're going to go, I don't know if we have any idea really. I do think it would be, I don't want to call it just an exercise because I don't want to waste people's time, but I think it would be really helpful to get a quote on something on this map that's green. Just so that we have an idea like what, or talk to some contractor or something, what is a typical, foot of crusher fine added to the side of a trail cost? I don't know if we have any clue at this point.
Yeah, I think we could totally get that kind of quote. And one of the things was what we did last time was when the board decided that they wanted that expedited trails, then we hired an engineer, which gave us true values. And then some of those trails dropped off and then some didn't because, the engineering component of it kind of feeds into a lot of that cost, like a realistic cost.
Right. So is that something that you could get for us? For example, the one that Dan has highlighted right there, to get a quote for that, at least some high level quote, not having anyone spend a huge amount of time on it because we don't want to waste anyone's time, but just getting kind of a ballpark at least for us.
Well, I could definitely, if you give me like the width and the length, and then we could say, this doesn't tie in any retaining walls or anything like that might have to be done because the engineers would kind of draw up the plan for that, and then those expenses would so it would be just like super basic.
Yeah, it looks like it's just over a half mile, the way I have it drawn.
And how wide is it 2 feet? Is it 3 feet wide?
I don't have a specific idea in mind. I think where it's next to the trail, it probably could be pretty narrow. But I'd say maybe
there's a crusher. I mean, there's a little crusher fine along Colton, along the sidewalk along Colton that's really narrow. Anyone know what the width of that one is?
I mean,
I think I know what you're talking about. Like this one.
That can't be more than a foot and a half, I don't think.
Yeah, it's not more than 2 feet, I would say.
Yeah, it's the one that's right next to the sidewalk. I mean, because that one is obviously augmenting, sidewalks, so folks have the choice, versus some of the ones that are only crusher fine are quite a bit wider.
One other thing I was just thinking of, I wonder if, since we're in the middle of the master plan rework, I wonder if we can essentially get kind of like a budgetary and, yes, this is a good idea, or no, this probably isn't a good idea from our the people that are helping us with our master plan document.
I think it's a very legitimate ask, in terms of, let's take, the 4.25 square miles that is Superior. There's not a lot of places to add a lot of new amenities. So how do you augment the amenities that we have? And this is, I think, what PROSTAC is sort of recommending as something that PROSTAC really wants to have investigated, and the consultants will be a great way to kind of put this, quantify it.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we could just start there, and that way we don't have to kind of guess on our own. We can have them maybe give us a little bit more direction as to.
I think it's okay to kind of parallel path, that half mile that you had highlighted, find out what the relative cost is for that, because we're going to go through budget here in a couple of months. The master plan's got quite a bit of ways to go, and I think it's okay that we sort of look at them both in parallel. I don't want to, in other words, I don't want to stall out this effort just waiting for the master plan to get completed, because given COVID and everything else, I don't know how fast that's going to go relative to the original schedule.
So Allison, can you get some numbers on, say, 2 feet wide? Is that a good number to pick?
Yeah, I think so. And like on Dry Creek Trail, it seems like it's 2 to 2.5 feet on, and it's all the way down the whole miles and miles is how they have it. So I think that's a good measurement.
Okay.
A couple comments I wanted to make real quick. One, do we have any record of what it cost on the one over by Colton? I mean, do we have what that estimate was? If we do, then we could probably use just that as a general estimate, right? I think the second comment I want to make is, addressing the comment about potentially adding cost into the trails list. And I guess from my perspective, I think trails should warrant their ranking based on the need, not based on the cost. However, I'm going to correct myself. Where we should have the cost available to us is when we're making budget recommendations. If there's certain budget available, and even though it's not the highest ranked trail, but it's something that we think we can knock off the list that it's one of the higher ranked trails because of the affordability of it, that's where cost helps. But we shouldn't use it for ranking, but we should use it for budget planning on year to year, or recommendations to the board based on what we think we might be able to get in.
Thanks for that, Corbett. I think that, I guess the way I think about it is similar to what you said, is where, we can't rank just based on cost. We have to rank based on the need. But at the same time, like that one along McCaslin, let's say it's $1.5 million or something like that. It seems like we almost need to have some gross cost measurement in there just in case it doesn't make sense, until McCaslin's redone or something like that, like we put in the notes. So I think both are probably helpful. Do we have any of that historical information that you know of, Allison? You said it was there and then it was taken off. Does that exist somewhere else? I don't know where that is.
Well, that was just on our expedited trail list. When we did the Elbow Trail over by Town 15, so we have a lot of that data, which was all concrete. It wasn't crusher fine. And I'm not sure about the Colton Trail, but I shot an email to Matt Rarick while we were talking, just asking him if he had a current, because we top dress a lot of those trails, but in this circumstance, we'd probably have to cut the sod, fill it. Oh, sorry. Cut the sod and fill it.
There you have it. Anything else, Allison, you need to say?
And level it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
so it's hard to get an estimate because you never know about grading and about bridges and all that type of stuff until you actually get somebody to really check out every area. What we could potentially do, though, is if we do something similar to the crusher fine and just say, hey, on average per foot, assuming that all things are the same, this is about what it would cost for this trail because it's about this long. Now, it may be more because it may have some unique features about it.
Right. I think at this point, just having that information would be helpful, because then we could at least on that green section that Dan just had highlighted, at least put some number to it. Because like right now, if we're going to go into the next agenda item of budget possibilities for next year, like I don't know if we were to ask to, hey, let's do this and try it on for size next year, are we asking for $50,000 or $500,000? I really have no idea. So I think that would be pretty helpful to know. I'm guessing you would like that too, Neil. I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think, to the comment that Corbett made earlier, I think that's really helpful because it's always good to have the full list of what, PROSTAC wants to prioritize. And then, the budget, we're going to fit within the budget, and we might want to see if PROSTAC's willing to pull something higher up on the list if we can squeeze it in. But ultimately, the prioritized unconstrained list is kind of the best way to kind of evaluate it, because otherwise we're going to get a bunch of 10-foot sections that connect little pieces rather than a 2-mile part that we really want.
Right. Okay, well, we'll look for Allison or Leslie to get back to us sometime in the next couple of weeks. Can we do that for the rough per square or per length?
Yeah, and it's just for approximately 2 feet wide, crusher fine, and then I can just give you that per foot cost, per linear foot cost, and then you could probably use it for any of these trails. Did you also want a concrete version, so then you would know for the new trails, like a comparison?
For right now, maybe hold off on that. But for the crusher fine, I think we should also assume that we need to cut in and do some leveling, because I think that one, like where Dan is looking, is a slight hill at least, most of the area there.
Well, and see, that's hard. That gets to the hard part, because then, that grading, and depending on what the slope is and having to use any fill or something like that, that's where you start getting into engineer type lingo. So, if you wanted the easy version of the linear foot, or do you want me to try to go out and get a bid? I guess
what I'm saying is, let's not get a quote on just what does the crusher fine cost per foot. Let's get a cost of what the trail would actually cost to put in, including some of those things, without going to the extra step of doing a fully engineered trail here and grading analysis and all that. I just want to be careful that we don't get, hey, it costs, it's going to be so many cubic feet of crusher fine per length, and that's what it is, because we're missing the installation cost then.
Oh, no. Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, let's wait to see what that cost is, I guess. And Dan, is there next steps that you want to take on figuring out what would be the best trails to do? If that one that you suggested is the right one, get more feedback from people, what is the next stuff to do?
I think maybe for me, the next step is just to bring it up with the PROST master plan consultants and get their take on it.
Okay. And you will give your map to them and talk to them about it? Okay, good.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else on that before we move on to budget stuff?
Dan, do you think you'll be able to do that before the meeting next month, and maybe we can discuss it again if you get any more information?
So I don't know. We had one engagement with them, but I'm not sure when the next one is. Allison, do you know? Is there a scheduled one, or should I just email it to them now?
You could just email it to him. We do have an update at the end. If you want to, do you want an update for what we're doing on the master plan, or?
It looks like we have that on the number 7 in the discussion list, so we could talk about that.
Yeah, and we have, I don't know, maybe it makes more sense to skip the budget for now and move it down and get an update from you. I think you and Susan attended the walk around on Friday. If it's all right with everyone, why don't we just skip the budgeting for right now and get an update on that?
Okay. Susan, do you want to take over? I feel like I'm dominating the meeting.
That was a very interesting experience. It was a good opportunity to get to know them a little bit and just kind of have maybe a less formal just chat about things we were seeing and general opinions. I mean, Allison was there as well as Leslie, so that was also helpful. For the part that I was there for, we started in Community Park over kind of by Safeway there, talked a bit about the turf fields, talked a bit about the ball fields, and then we kind of worked our way along through Community Park and decided to go all the way over to Town 15, since that's an important topic for us now and for going forward. And so I think it was really helpful for them to actually see that and be able to ask us questions and just have a free-flowing dialogue. They seemed like very knowledgeable. They asked a lot of pointed questions, and I think it was very useful for them to get the lay of the land, literally. And then I had to take off, and I think the rest of the crew went on to Autry Park. Maybe you could pick up and discuss anything that went on over there, Dan.
If I can just for a second, Susan, what were the big takeaways you had as far as questions they asked or things that were, I guess, the things that caught your attention from them?
I don't know that I had specific takeaways. They asked a lot of questions. It was just a lot of good free-flowing dialogue as near as I could tell. They were asking questions about field usage and things like that. We talked a bit about the whole business of connectivity from Community Park across Colton and the, exorbitant impossible price of putting a bridge over and things like that. And I think a lot of it was just them getting familiar with the town and getting a sense of what we're interested in. When we got to Town 15, they had a lot of questions, kind of started throwing out a lot of ideas, and then we started throwing out a lot of ideas. And
Yeah.
because it's a big empty space, there's so many different possibilities, and that's going to be interesting. But I really wanted to leave them with the understanding that we as PROSTAC and OSAC collectively believe that it's really important to preserve that for some community use at some point, as opposed to, kind of leaving it up for grabs, which I think there's been a sense of in the past few years.
Yeah, Town 15 was the only one where I remember them giving feedback on specific ideas that we were talking about. Every other one, it was just kind of like, here's different things that we've talked about, and them kind of taking notes and stuff. But yeah, on Town 15, the one I remember specifically was that I brought up the community gardens thing that had been mentioned there. And they made the comment that they've seen those not do very well in suburban environments like we're in, because most people can have their own gardens in their backyard, and so they end up getting not very utilized. So I thought that was interesting. That's the main thing I can remember in terms of like them giving feedback on stuff that we've talked about possibly going into places. For Autry Park, we kind of just did the loop around the pickleball court and the skate park. The skate park was really busy. I think it usually is. It was really busy that morning. So they saw that. Talked a little bit about like the fact that there was grass missing along the side of the skate park, and the difficulty of trying to get that seeded or get native grass to grow there. That was one of the conversations that we talked about. We talked about the possible different routing for concrete paths through the center, or around, like we talked about at the previous meeting. And they were basically, I think, in favor of both paths, kind of like we were. And that was the main thing. I don't know, am I missing anything at Autry Park, Allison?
No, I think that's great. Great summary.
And then we went to the pool, and I really wasn't too involved in that discussion. I didn't have much to add. That was actually my first time going to the pool. So I really didn't have much to add at that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was North Pool. I'm sorry.
Yeah, North Pool.
And then we went to South.
Yeah, I had to drop off, so I didn't make it to the South Pool.
Anything else, Allison, to add?
Well, after North Pool, we went to South Pool and just kind of walked around, and it's pretty obvious, like that structure was obviously more of a community structure, built for the community, as opposed to North Pool structure, which was more HOA type building. Yeah, I mean, it was great. I thought they had a lot of good comments, and they were really paying attention to, what everybody was talking about.
As far as information getting to them from PROSTAC and staff and others, I mean, we've given them sort of a dump of documents early on. How are we going about next steps of getting them information? There was some talk at one point about sort of each of us sitting down with them for a little bit and giving them our personal feedback. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to happen, but what are next steps on sort of the brain dump to them?
So the next steps that I'm aware of is there's going to be community engagement. There's going to be a Zoom meeting. I want to say August 3rd, but I may be getting it mixed up with the art. Hold on, I can look it up. But there's going to be a community engagement meeting. It's going to be a Zoom. People have to register for it. That information, if it hasn't already gone out, should be going out soon. There's so much data that we've given them as far as the pros department, all of our GIS layers, many, different maps and information there. A lot of our data as far as all the different parks and sizes and amenities and as well as PROSTAC's documents, some OSAC documents. And so they've gotten so much. I mean, it's been a real dump. And now we're filling in a lot of spreadsheets of information that they want in certain ways, on programming and sales and just all kinds of data.
So one of the things that we had asked about to happen in this document or in the results, I guess, from them are looking forward, obviously for the next 10 years, looking at what are the demographics of all this new housing that's going to be, what are we missing? I guess I want to ask, are they for sure going down that path of not just looking at what today looks like, but what the future is going to look like?
Yes, and at build out, I want to say the number was 15,400 right in there at build out from all of the new developing, people that are going to move in. And I know that they've gotten a bunch of data from Census and Esri and, National Parks and Rec Association where it's certain populaces and usually under 20,000 is kind of under 20,000, be it 10,000 or 15,000, So a lot of that data kind of remains the same. I know that depending on who moves in, that may change a little bit, but they did, I've seen a recent report where they're starting to do some of that demographic data and they know those numbers for the build outs.
Okay. Anything else on this, guys?
I was going to mention, I just checked my email and the community engagement meeting is August 3rd at 6:30 p.m. There's a registration link. If you search for the last Parks, Recreation, Open Space July newsletter, it's at the bottom of that.
Right. So both of those meetings are probably happening. Well, that one's happening on the 3rd, and then the CAPS art stuff, which we'll get to later, is the week of the 3rd.
So what do they need from us going forward, Allison? Do you know?
I don't know yet. As soon as right now we have some data that we're finishing up to turn in, and then weekly we're having check-ins where they're like, okay, now let's do this. So I have the next meeting tomorrow, and depending on what comes out of that meeting, I'll send out an email to let everybody know.
Okay. Sounds good. Any idea of what Neil sort of suggested, that there could be some slippage in timeline? Do we know anything about that? Are they still on track, do we think?
You know, I'm not really sure as far as hitting the deadlines that they've proposed to us. We're doing well. I think our engagement seems to be pushed out a little bit compared to the first information in the beginning.
Could you ask that tomorrow and just see what their thoughts are on that?
Will do.
Thank you. Any other specific things we would like to be asked of them tomorrow?
I was just going to ask, should I summarize anything about the trail and that particular trail that we were talking about for your meeting tomorrow, or when do you need something from me for that, or
Do you want to share your map with me and maybe
Sure.
your survey? And then I think that they're so open to data, and they were so appreciative that you guys came to the meeting, to the walkthroughs, that they'll take everything. And
Okay. Yeah, I'll just send a summary to you then, and you can pass that along to them.
Okay. Anything else on?
Well, yeah, I would
Okay.
still like to see if there's if they still have available time to support either one-on-one or at least a group session, just with PROSTAC and not as part of the community. I'd like to still go to the community, but a little bit more specialized at PROSTAC. If you could ask them that if they still have time in their schedule to be able to support something like that.
That was in their plan, I believe, to have some specific engagement with us. I just don't know based on the schedule when they envisioned that happening.
yeah, I definitely think the walkthrough was the first step of that, but I definitely remember that there was going to be other opportunities for sure.
So can I sign you up for an action item to figure out when that's going to be for ProStack? Allison, is that something you can ask them tomorrow?
I have an email with a list going. So if I look like I'm not looking at the camera, it's
Okay.
Okay, any other actions for Allison and them tomorrow? Okay, let's wrap that one up. Let's circle back to the budget. So I have gotten very few things from this group in terms of ideas for budget for next year. Sort of the ongoing things that we've had: shade in parks, bike racks. There was an item of fixing the net at the end of the ball field. I don't know, has that actually happened just through maintenance? Allison, do you know? Has that been taken care of yet or not?
the ball field net. Is that what
Yeah.
you said?
Yeah.
Gosh, I haven't touched base on that since you guys told me when I was in Patrick's shoes. So I'll send an email on that to Matt and see if I knew that they were planning on perhaps sewing it, but I don't know if that's occurred.
Okay. Just want to make sure we get that in there. Any other ideas on things for budget? We got to vote on this next month to give a proposal to the board. So we're really looking for any ideas that we really think are worthy, hopefully backed up by some of the citizens who really want this and not just us. But any ideas out there on what this should be?
I was going to mention that one of the things that came up on our walkthrough community park was Matt pointed out how we're kind of in need of some repair on a couple of the like restroom buildings that we have, like the one that's next to the playground equipment. That one looks pretty rough. It's pretty weathered and there's wood missing off the end of it and stuff. It's starting to look pretty ragged. So I don't know if that needs to go in our budget or not, but that is one thing I was just thinking of.
So Neil, being sort of new to what things we can and can't and should and shouldn't suggest to the board for budget, can you give some guidance on, like, for what Dan just said, I'm assuming we should probably point out anything that comes to our attention, but sort of where are the bounds of what we really should be proposing?
My feeling is don't constrain yourself with anything. For example, one of the things that didn't come from PROSTAC, but maybe it could have, Fire Station Park, the concrete was broken and had to be replaced because some poor drainage from one of the neighbors. And it was on the list, and the board pulled it up because it was a safety issue. So if we're seeing things that are falling apart, if we're seeing things that are just lived past or gone past their useful life, let's definitely put those on the board's radar. PROSTAC doesn't have a budget of a certain amount of dollars. So don't worry about, to the degree that the board's got to kind of try to sort out what's the most important, what to do first. That's, I don't think PROSTAC has to worry about that, but I think it's your job to prioritize the things that the community can use, and whether it's, a new amenity or fixing an existing amenity, I wouldn't sweat the details there. Let us try to sort it out. Find the things that you think the community will benefit from the most. Now, if it's a maintenance or other issue, maybe flag it as something else, because we do have to start investing in our existing infrastructure, because a lot of it, I think the pools are the best example of, we inherited it from the builder, and we have been deferring the maintenance on that for quite some time. And I think at a certain point, you've gone past the useful life. We're definitely building things differently now because the town's building it as opposed to the builders. So it's a different frame of reference. But for the things that are out there that were built by Richmond or starting to look aged, let's worry about those. Another aspect of that, if you take the ADA upgrades, so this has been on the radar for PROSTAC and the board for quite some time, but we haven't really made a lot of progress. And I'm not sure when we start pulling the trigger on these things. And I know Allison can probably tell us about the schedule for maintenance and updates on existing parks and stuff like that. And I think it's within PROSTAC and the board's discretion to pull things forward and push things out around there as well. Long answer to a simple question.
So for each of these things, take that restroom example that Dan gave again. Do we need to flag it as an item to worry about and for you to put in the budget and think about from a prioritization standpoint? Do we need to come to you with specific dollars, like, hey, it's going to cost $16,000 to make this thing look pretty again? What do we actually need to give you?
I have a quick bit of info. I ran to get my budget book. That's why I ran away. So both of those items, the ADA playground surfacing at community and community park building upgrades, are in the budget for 2024. They do keep, like as Neil, our trustee Shaw said, that they keep getting pushed out. So, but they are there. So I know that they're listening. Everybody's been listening and putting it into the budget. It's just whether it gets done.
Hey, Todd, I think one thing that we've done in the past, and I would, promote, is that when we're talking about the budget stuff, we talk about all the things like Neil said that we think should go in the budget, and Allison is there and Neil are there to say, oh, we already have that. You don't need, you need to recommend it, or we can, double check it because you guys also recommend it. But to Neil's point also is, originally they weren't mowing over by the disc golf course, right? And we had a lot of people complain about the snakes and the safety of that area. So we recommended to town, hey, it really should probably start mowing this area. And I don't remember whether it went into the budget or it was just a recommendation, but it was either way, they took it into account and put it into the budget to start mowing it because it was a cost impact.
And I think that the master plan is another good example of this. Has been, the master plan update has been high on the list for PROSTAC for, I don't know, let's call it 5 years, probably longer. We finally pulled the trigger this year. I think with every other year, you're going to have some new board members that are going to have different priorities on how they want to push and pull, but continue to advocate for the things that you think the community wants. As PROSTAC represents the community, it's your job to kind of put forth the things that you really think the board should prioritize. And it's a combination of enhancements to existing things and new things too.
And I have a quick question. So, we are to finish the master plan, and I was wondering if the group was even going to bring up an amount of money to begin the implement whatever comes out of this process. And if it does come to fruition sometime in December, we're not going to know what that dollar amount is, but maybe it's an amount like, we would love to put this forward to the beginning of implementing, some amount.
Actually,
Yeah,
Allison, that's a fantastic idea. And just 1 second, I mean, this is what CAPS did last year. We had a $500,000 placeholder spread out over 5 years to basically implement, the CAPS master plan. So it was a little stressful, from a budgeting perspective, because it was $100,000 per year and no one could tell us what was in it until the master plan was done at the end of the year. So I think it's a fantastic approach as a plug, depending on what PROS comes back with. Sorry.
And if all that data is given to the consultant that, Crusher Fine Trails, here's what we're thinking, upgrades to buildings, and then they can take all of these demographics and information and create a comprehensive list of, easy things to do, harder things to do, more expensive things to do, and kind of rack and stack it a little bit.
Hey, I've got a question. So maybe we can ask the consultants is there typically a certain amount of money that when they finish these projects that they know on average that folks need to implement right away to really help out, and on average it's X amount of dollars? If we could ask them, and maybe that could help guide the initial request.
Great idea.
Yeah, from my perspective, I kind of hate to single anything out because I feel like that's kind of what we're paying them to help us do. And so, I'm all for asking them for suggestion and putting something open-ended in the budget to say, implement phase 1 of whatever we come out of this with.
I'm in agreement with that approach too.
What is
So another action item for Allison?
I'm typing.
She's going to stop coming to these meetings.
Yeah.
I love it. The more we get done and people are happy, the more I'm happy.
So you realize, Neil, based on what you said to us a little bit ago, I'm putting an earmark for at least $500K for things in the future here.
Well, I mean, that was over 5 years, but my feeling is, and honestly, this is as a resident, our parks are what make Superior so awesome. Let's be honest, or at least one aspect of it. There are other things too, the open space and so on. But let's continue to invest in them, and let's go for a big number. Don't pull the punch just because you think you might get said, you might get told no. It's like any standard budget. We're gonna rack and stack and prioritize based on what we can fit. But ultimately, if we truly are committed to making this a great place to live, we got to continue to invest in our amenities. And CAPS went bold. I mean, I mean, 100,000 a year was just, and I think a lot of us were like, what is this for? Until we saw the master plan. So I think the master plan here is really going to augment the, here's what we want to do. But in addition, don't hesitate to say, there's 3 parks that don't have bike racks. We got to sort that out in 2021.
And it's interesting because we gave the consultant the art master plan because there is some relevant information as far as like what you were talking about, a main spine through town. Like if they wanted to do some type of art walk, could these 2 groups, fund that together through both master plans and then, have that overlap that makes sense, financially and brain power.
How does 1500 Colton play into this? And is there anything that we need to worry about there, or should we just kind of assume that that's budgetarily taken care of separately?
My feeling is, at least from a capital perspective, it's taken care of. That's moving forward. From a programming perspective and an ongoing, headcount, managing programs, what type of programs, that piece of it's still a black box.
Okay.
I think if PROSTAC wants to say, maybe the town should get serious about hiring a part-time staff member to manage 1500 Colton, for example, that's not unacceptable. Or that's definitely acceptable. A way to pursue. If and I was looking at the amenity list, and it's been a pretty phenomenal year in terms of things that have been checked off. The master plan, pickleball, community center. But what happens with the community center from here? It's just going to be a building. How are we going to activate it? It's not going to activate itself just because we turn the lights on. What's the sustaining investment that PROSTAC would like to see the board make in that area? And it might just be headcount. I don't know.
Is there any, like you said, it's a black box right now. Is there any money budgeted for any headcount for 1500 Colton going forward to manage the programming?
That's a question I can't answer off the top of my head. I think there is, or partial head. And then there's basic operating costs for the building. But beyond that, I think it's fairly squishy right now.
Okay.
And it was a placeholder. I mean, when we did this a year ago, we were just then, inking the purchase agreement. So, I think not knowing what the building looks like or what was going to look like, what was going to be in the building, a lot of that's still TBD. And somewhere in this as well is downtown Superior and the facility there. And, if it's a half-time head now, the 1500 Colton is a potentially a full-time head when downtown Superior's facility is open as well. That one, I mean, there's a lot of interdependencies here that, no one on PROSTAC or no one on staff can sort out by themselves because we don't know yet. But, if PROSTAC really wants to, I think this is the next thing to talk about, in terms of, PROSTAC's charter, one of them is rec programming. How do we want to capitalize on that going forward? As we fill in, all the amenities that we want, how do we want to start, embracing the R in the PROSTAC name, with dollars?
Right. I assume the downtown 10,000 square feet or whatever it's going to be at this point, with some of that construction being delayed, that's so far in the future. We don't care about that right now, correct?
I would not worry about it. I mean, hey, maybe it'll come in 2023. Fantastic. But for now, it's definitely not a 2021 concern.
Right. Okay. Anything else on budget other than we need to all put our thinking caps on, and please send any ideas that you have to me as soon as you have them, so we can put that together prior to our next month's meeting. Any other thoughts today?
So then are we not okay with this idea of just kind of putting a placeholder for dependencies on the master plan, or do we have to come up with specific things by next month?
Well, I think the placeholder is good, Susan, and we need to do that for things that we don't know. But I think for the things that we do know, so for example, bike racks at Community Park, we know we need them. I think it's a fairly urgent thing for hopefully 2021 that we should be able to get those things in. They're not that expensive. So, things like that, I think we should pull out and be very specific on. If I understand the bathrooms are, I think Allison said, for 2023 or 24 slated for maintenance. But if we think that that's needed sooner, I think we need to speak up and say that. So any specific things that we have, we should definitely bring up. Okay,
well, I guess I'd like to officially speak up and say that I agree with Dan that that's a need that we should prioritize ahead of the current 2024 schedule or whatever it was.
Okay.
Yeah, it's going to look pretty rough by 2024, I think.
It looks pretty rough right now.
Got it. So do we want to take it upon ourselves in the next couple of weeks to actually walk around all the parks and have a real-time input on this? Can we carve the parks up somehow and do that for each of us to take on something, or if we want to do it as a group, or I don't know how to do that, but I'd hate to have things like, the bathroom falling apart and us not even know it because we haven't been there for a while or something.
I think we covered Community Park pretty well with the walkthrough. And that was the main thing that I noticed there. So
Okay.
Autry Park, we kind of covered that one as well. I think the main ones we probably haven't covered would be Purple Park. I'm not sure, we could probably, I could swing through the next time I make it out for a run and look at the restrooms there, make sure that they don't look.
Yeah, we tried to do this last year also, and we were really mostly focused on what we think things could be needed for improvement, but it was around the winter time, right? We did it. I think it'd be good if we maybe, divvy some of these things up so we can go back and look and say, not only what is falling apart, but also in terms of shade, because this is the perfect time of year to be able to look at some of these things and say, is there any additional shade needed in some of these areas where when we were looking at during the winter, you really didn't get that same perspective.
Right. Well,
And that's a good one. I mean, the board at the last retreat, we did talk a little bit more about, increasing our budget for trees because we've had to cut down higher number of trees this year than normal. And, how do we backfill that? Obviously, it's going to take time to grow, but when you've cut down a bunch of trees and it's going to take another 15 years for them to grow, do we want to put in some structure in some areas that we never thought of it before?
So in terms of divvying up the parks and going out and doing this, I guess, do we want to volunteer that? Do you want to just break it up and each get assigned a couple of parks, or how do we want to do this to get some feedback? Because we really need to get it in within the next month. I think we have a good idea on some of them, but some of the outlying ones, I don't think we necessarily do.
Maybe what we could do is put a spreadsheet that has all the parks listed on it that's shared out there that folks can sign up for. And then I personally will look at it once a week and just keep knocking them off. And if it's the final week and a lot of them aren't hit, I'll just go hit the rest of them.
Okay. I'm going to be out the next week, but I can do that when I get back and we can get them nailed. So I will put a spreadsheet together with all the parks and a section for comments that you guys can all fill in. And then just go ahead and take them as you can and put the comments in there. And we can at least knock them off that way. So good idea, Corbett. Anything else on budget to discuss? Are we good? Okay, moving on to caps. Tell us about what's going to go on schedule-wise there, Allison, and when we need to engage.
Okay, so currently they have an RFQ up on the website, which you can take a look at. It has a timeline. If you go to our Superior website, go to bids, and then it's called RFQ CFE OR Trailhead. That is going to conclude at the end of the month. I think it's July 30th is the deadline. And so the week of August 3rd, the group is going to review applications. That should be the last meeting, and it could be up to 3 hours. And CAP has been requesting participation from PROSTAC, at least 2 members, to kind of volunteer to come into the subcommittee to select the applications and make the discussions. So that's pretty much the next steps.
So you said the week of, do you know more specific time and date on that?
I do not. I don't think they've finalized which day of the week of August 3rd, but whoever wanted to volunteer for this subcommittee, I could let Dina know, or we could just email her and let her know who needs to be kept in the loop from the committee once we have our volunteers.
Okay, Dan, I know that you had mentioned that you really wanted to be part of that.
Yeah, I'm not artistic enough. I don't really think I'm qualified.
Any other takers on that?
Yeah, you can throw my name on it. Sure, I'll try to support it.
Okay, Corbett. And Susan, any particular interest in that or not really? I think you said that you would if we needed that.
If more participation is needed, I would do it. It's not probably higher priority for me, but if help is needed, I will do it.
Okay.
In my world, he who's not, or they who are not here usually get assigned the action. Just saying.
Okay, well we'll put Susan and Corbett down for that. And if anyone else wants to, let me know. now moving on to the fun topic of the night is OSAC, PROSTAC potentially combining or being reorganized in some way, and all of that fun. This is something that the board, I'm not sure all of how that came to be within the board. Neil, do you want to give us a little on that?
Sure. And, I think this is not intended to be, anything hard and fast. This is kind of, what happened is the board spent the open space money for the next 20 years to buy CenturyLink. So, the open space funds are basically depleted until 2040. And given that, OSAC had initially been set up, to administer those funds and use the funds to preserve open space, the original mission for OSAC is potentially changed. So at the last retreat, the board, sort of suggested, given that OSAC and PROSTAC are down a couple heads each, this might be a good time to look at a potential merger. The question then ultimately is how to do it. And that's what we kind of kick back to OSAC and PROSTAC, and what's the right way to do it? And, should they stay separate? I don't know that anybody on the board is fairly prescriptive about, they have to merge or they have to stay separate. We really want to hear from the members and the community in terms of what makes the most sense. And what Todd alluded to is, maybe part of this is redefining what the committees are doing. And that's actually come out for me since we had the discussion at the board. I thought a merger made the most sense. But as I've been continuing to think about this, maybe a redefinition of what the two committees are doing. And I think if you think about, how much overlap there is right now and what that creates in terms of inefficiencies, we can probably do away with that, so we don't have, to review their list and they got to review this list and that back and forth. There's probably some things that we can streamline there, because not only does it make PROSTAC or this group more efficient, it makes staff life much easier. Because, I think a perfect example of where this kind of came to a head is the Autry Park bikeway. Both OSAC and PROSTAC looked at it and came up with completely different answers. And now staff is trying to figure out how do we sort through this. So to the degree that we can diminish the overlap, either through a single committee or two committees with redefined scopes, I think it's going to make everyone's lives much easier. And one of the things I just said a few minutes ago, the R in PROSTAC is not something that PROSTAC as a group has opined on a lot. Recreation programming is something that is going to start becoming more apparent with 1500 Colton. How does that change for the charter going forward? So it's some food for thought, just given, and then this, we had this discussion when PROSTAC was down 2 people and now we're down 3. So it does make it a little bit more, difficult, if not more timely. The board just went through and did appointments, or at least we reviewed resumes and interviewed people for CAPS, ACES, and Historical Commission last week. But there have been applications for PROSTAC and OSAC, but staff is sitting on those for right now until we kind of decide, or the groups decide what's the right path forward. So from a timeline, it was sort of talk about it like now, come to the board when you're ready. The other option is a board can just say, you're going to merge and wham, it's done. And that would be disingenuous and not, it really wouldn't be the right way to do it. I think, a lot of folks, actually everybody who's on the call right now, you've all been part of PROSTAC for quite some time. You've got a lot of history here and you've seen the overlap and you've seen the not conflicts, but the overlap. So, and there's probably, I think, a lot of great ideas among this group on how to sort through that and potentially merge or sort of redefine the boundary conditions for the two groups.
Thanks, Neil.
Yep.
So this came to my attention, I don't know, probably a couple of weeks ago, and had a meeting with the town staff folks and with Ryan, and tried to just kind of get a first blush of how would this happen if we were going to combine the two groups. And so the conclusion out of that meeting was basically, if this is to happen, we didn't really talk a lot about should it or shouldn't it. We talked mainly about if we were going to combine the two groups, what would it look like? What should it look like to work? And the conclusion that we came to was that it really needed to look like some subcommittees for specific things. So subcommittee for open space, subcommittee for trails, subcommittee for recreation programming, etc. And then those groups would have to be, part of the whole. that right now is, I don't know, 12 or 13 people if you combine everyone on OSAC and PROSTAC. So more than the 9 of each group that they normally have. And that those subcommittees would have to meet, some could meet monthly, some could meet quarterly. It depends on really, their workload and the specific things. Those groups would come up and roll up to the entire group, and somehow we would have to figure out how to be efficient in not, regurgitating everything that happened in the subcommittees, and sort of there would have to be trust built there so that the summary of the subcommittee meetings could happen, and if votes needed to happen, they could happen without, having to rehash everything that happened in the subcommittee. And so there'd be some learning involved there, obviously, in how to do that. And I think the conclusion that Ryan and I walked away with was, if we needed to do this, it could work. The concerns there were workload for people. For many, if not most of the people, that model would look like maybe double duty each month. You might go to a whatever the combined OSAC PROSTAC meeting would be called on a monthly basis, and that there would need to be attendance at one of these subcommittee groups. And so one of the concerns was, could we get enough people willing to, put in maybe twice as much time as they do now? Is that possible? How many people would fall away? What would that look like? So that was a concern. There was some concern on prioritization of things. And I think there was initially some concern on the part of OSAC. I don't know if you guys have been able to look at their, either watch or look at their summary. I think I have their, let's see here. I have their summary up here if I can share my screen here. Can you guys all see that? So that is right here is essentially their summary of concerns for this.
Can you make it any bigger, Todd?
I can do that, yes. Can you see that now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I also watched their the video of their meeting discussing this as well, and it was interesting. This is a good summary, but in just hearing the course of their discussion, some people definitely had some pretty strong opinions about it. So
yeah, there were definitely, I think the biggest concern I heard in watching that was just the feeling that the priorities for OSAC, which were, at least in the minds of those that were voicing that, were the open space acquisition and the wildlife aspects of that, would kind of get buried underneath all of this parks and recreation type things. And I think that was the biggest concern that I had, or maybe the most emotional concern I heard out of that group. And so there's a concern on mission and, what would be absorbed if this feeling of being absorbed into PROSTAC, and that wasn't a happy thing at all. And then maintaining members. And so I think that the concept overall of merging the two groups into one, if you look at the number of people, the number of hours that we can get from people, and you look at, let's see here, can you all see this spreadsheet?
not yet.
Do you still see the other one?
Yes.
Okay. Why is it not letting me do this?
We can see all your tabs too, so if you can just move it into this.
It's not, it's a spreadsheet, so that doesn't really help, unfortunately.
I thought it was really interesting a long time ago when this was first brought up a few years ago. I actually found a resolution from the beginning of PROSTAC where the members were stratified, much like what you're saying. Like there were like 2 members from YMCA and 2 members that were parks and 2 members that were recreation, and like 1 member that was non-affiliated but with this user group. So it was very interesting, you know, each time this comes up to revisit some of those documents.
Yeah, well, the history was interesting. In their meeting, Ryan went through kind of a history of OSAC being started, I believe, in about 2001, with the mandate of giving recommendation to the board on how the open space money should be spent. And then PROSTAC didn't come along until 2007 or something, I think.
Until the districts were dissolved.
Right. So there was sort of the need for the city to manage the pools and park and all that. And so it is an interesting history. If you look at, this is a compilation of OSAC work plan this year, PROSTAC work plan this year, and a combined work plan that is just an eye chart. And so in looking at that, this is a spreadsheet that Ryan put together for all of that stuff, and he went through with their group as well. But if you look at this, and if we have the mindset that we don't really want anything to hit the floor and just drop the balls that we're juggling, there's a lot of things in this view. The green is overlap. In the PROSTAC view, the green is overlap. So there's the blue is things that are not covered by OSAC. And so when you put all those together, you get this long list of things. And a concern of mine, I guess, in talking through this more with Ryan and with Neil the past week or so, has been like, how do we do this? You know, how would this? It's nice to say, let's put these groups together, we're going to get efficient and all that. But like, how would we actually do it, putting it into shoe leather and making it work? And there's just a lot of things to get done. And I'm not sure that in looking at this over the time that I have, that I would be on board with saying it really makes sense to make one group. I mean, I would, if the board says go do it, I would, you know, certainly do it. But in looking at it, it seems like, to me anyway, a better way of looking at this may be to redefine who's doing what, so that we don't have the overlap that is there today. And we can avoid things like what Neil brought up with the, you know, double duplication of recommendations to the board. So they have to then, you know, figure out who should we listen to, or, you know, the gyrations that causes. But get really crisp in not having this overlap. So one, we don't have to do double duty on it like we do today with trails and things like that. But also so that the board can get very crisp recommendations and they don't have to think too hard about it. And so at least in my thinking about this and leaning and looking at the work plan and what actually needs to get done, it seems like that may be a better approach. So I'd be really interested in hearing from you guys. That's all I know to date. And those are my thoughts in talking and thinking about this. But I'd be really interested in understanding from you guys what your thoughts are.
My thought is, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, you can go.
So
You've got seniority.
You know, I've always thought it was challenging for us to get through our full plan every year. And sometimes we push things off, and there's a lot of stuff that we should be doing that Neil alluded to earlier that we aren't doing because we don't have the time meeting once a month to be able to do this. And that includes a lot of the recreation piece. So there's a lot of stuff that's in our purview that we're not able to do. There's a lot of stuff that's in our purview that we subscribe to do, but we don't get it done, or we don't get it done to the level we would really like to get it done to, because we don't, you know, we have so much other stuff on it that I would be hard pressed to combine the groups to say that we can somehow do the unique stuff to OSAC, the unique stuff to us, add the stuff in that we should be doing that we aren't doing, and still try to get it all done in a year. That's just, it just doesn't make sense to me at all. So I'm with you, Todd, that, you know, in order to really get the stuff done we should get done, we should take a holistic look at, you know, the roles and responsibilities of each group, and maybe, you know, do some kind of level loading so that we can actually get the stuff done that we need to get done, especially as some of the recreation stuff becomes more important here in the future.
Dan, has things to add?
Yeah, so my opinion is that I think to me, it makes more sense to combine the committees. And in terms of like all the list all the things that are on the list today. I think that you could use the subcommittee approach, and maybe it's not necessarily like physical meetings that you're doing as a subcommittee, but more of like, I feel like we could get a lot more accomplished if we had, we're going to talk about this after you prepare some, report about, like, someone takes an action item to do something between each meeting. And then the update is less about, general discussion and more just about, here's the specific thing that I did since the last meeting. I'm giving a report on it, and then we maybe have some discussion on it. I think there might be some opportunities to optimize the amount of time that we spend in the meeting, and still give a chance for people who care about specific things to contribute to that, but maybe do that more outside of the meeting. But I do think one of the ideas that I think is interesting is using maybe streamlining the number of committees that we have, and maybe adding another committee. Like I'm interested myself in the technology committee, and I think we have a lot of really technically savvy people in the community, and I think that is an area that would be nice to kind of do a deep dive on what we have in terms of technology for the town and what we could have. So I'm kind of excited about that idea myself. And if we were looking for, freeing up space for other committee members, I think I would be interested in switching to that committee if it were to exist.
So to summarize what I think I heard, Dan, you think combining makes sense, try to get good at being efficient, taking things out of the main meeting, and that would be the way you would go.
Yeah, like for everyone that says, I haven't been through this list in detail, but like for everyone that says, update each meeting, not much going on, 2 minutes per meeting, like what if those were instead either quarterly updates or updates as needed? Basically if something exciting happens or interesting happens for one of the subcommittees that's responsible for that, then they bring it up in the meeting, but otherwise they just do once, twice a year or quarterly or something like that.
Well, there's certainly efficiencies that we could have, and I guess I can look at this 2 ways. If this was a business and I was running the business, there's no questions. I'd say we're going to combine these committees. We're going to force it to be in a limited amount of time, and you guys are going to figure out how to be efficient. That's just how it's going to work. And whether it would work or not, I don't know, but that's what I'd say. In the world of, I don't hope this sounds too bad, but free labor, where we have citizens that are working for free and that have passions about different things. And we have, I think, based on the applications that I've heard that town staff has got for the 2 committees, there's plenty of people that want to be involved. Mm-hmm. And so in this world, it seems to me that maybe we can be a little bit less rigid on having to be, so efficient, and maybe be relaxed enough to do a really, really good job on everything rather than trying to be as efficient as possible.
And not to sway one way or another, but there were years where we weren't having quorums and, things like that. But we do have 12 between the 2 committees now because we had another person resign.
Right. And so right now, do we have plenty of applications to fully populate both groups if we were to do it that way?
I'm not sure if it's fully, but I think there are quite a few.
Okay.
I guess I have a couple thoughts. One is, to your point, Dan, if we got into a situation where people were sort of working almost a little bit more offline on some of their subcommittee work, I agree that from a business perspective, that could be very efficient, but from a community engagement perspective, it might be a little bit too out of the public eye, if you will. And the one advantage to at least the structure we have now is everything that we talk about is public view, and we have opportunity for public comment, and everybody can go back and look at everything that we did for the most part. And I would be a little concerned if we started having too much stuff kind of going off in different times, locations, places, different groups of people. But the other thing is, having listened to the whole discussion from OSAC, at first I was very much in favor of this one centralized big committee with subcommittees, but I could definitely hear the opposing point of view of some people, which is more, let's just be more specific about our swim lanes. Let's carve out what we're really responsible for. Does open space and wildlife stuff maybe fit more neatly together versus parks and rec? And then trails is the one thing that seems to be of interest to everybody, so I'm not sure about that one, but I could really see an argument there as well versus maybe, having people who are passionate about wildlife sit through all our discussions about, what we're doing with 1500 Colton.
So if we were to pin you down, Susan, and say you had to pick one or the other, what would you do?
I would go with the latter of keeping the two and redefining them. I just think in the long run, it will be easier to manage. I think the real question is, especially when I look at this giant list that Orion put together, is it might be easier for us to figure out the things where we really do need to have overlap in discussion versus trying to have the big giant list and then divide that into subcommittees. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
certainly
that-
there's going to be some overlap, but
I think that any way you go about it, it's going to be a change. And I think a change is needed because both from a board standpoint and from just managing it with OSAC and PROSTAC, I think that we at least need to, as you said, clearly define what our swim lanes are and stay within them. Because as soon as we start getting out of our lane, we cause all sorts of problems. And I think that there's another piece of this that Neil and Corbett brought up, and that's the recreation and programming part of it. I don't know all of the history of PROSTAC, but I don't see us, at least in the couple of years that I've been a member of the committee, that we've done a lot with that. I think it's something that town staff
we've
sort of
tried.
just does, that just happens, right? Magically happens. At least that's what
Well,
it seems like to me. And so I don't know all of the history in the past, but I do think that we need to, especially with 1500 Colton coming online here in the next year, and that we're going to need to spend a lot more time on those things than we have at least in the last 2 years. And with that, I think it could be helpful actually for some things potentially to drop off of what PROSTAC does, and sort of do the load balancing between PROSTAC and OSAC. And I don't know how that would work exactly, but at least in my perspective, if we threw everything on the table and we just sort of carved out what made most logical sense and efficiency sense, whatever it is, I think, and whatever we call the groups going forward, I think that would be the best way to go about it. Like, how do we give the most bang for citizen volunteer time to the city? How do we get the best results? How do we, do that without, if we can, having too many emotions involved into, our sacred little areas that we want to have. And so I don't know if it makes the most sense to look at this like OSAC exists and they have a focus on at least at this point, open space acquisition, managing open space, trails, and wildlife type of things. Whether or not that should be what they're doing, I think that's what they have been doing for the most part. And then we have us where we have some, we care about open space and we give our recommendations on open space acquisitions and trails, and then we do all of the other parks and rec stuff. And should this look like, we just figure out where to draw the lines and we draw some clear lines and separate it in those two pools? Is there a better way to divvy out the workload? Are those the right ways of, if we are going to put these things into two totally mutually exclusive groups, is that the right delineation to have? I don't really know. But I think if we're going to do this, we ought to do it right. We ought to think about it and not just come to a real quick conclusion of, oh, we're going to smush these two groups together, or we're going to make them separate. And, you know, by next week, we have to have the clarity on who's doing what. I think we should, I guess, take whatever time is needed to do it right. And I don't feel like there's an emergency right now. Maybe the board does, but I don't think there's an emergency that we have to have this decision made overnight.
Hey, and I'd like to add one thing, you know, to clarify the position I was saying earlier is a smart man once told me facts and figures will set you free. And I've always gone by that, right? And what I mean by that is it really does, you know, it's really important if we have to establish what are the roles and responsibilities currently in each group. And then not just what are the roles and responsibilities, but how much effort is in each role and responsibility. And not only how much effort, but what is the prioritization? You know, as we've seen in our past, you know, recreation is part of our purview, but it's one of the lower responsibilities because luckily we have such a great Parks and Rec staff there to take it up for us where we don't have to worry about it. So it was a lower priority, right? But if you start looking at here's all the scope of work, here's the amount of effort for each thing, and here's the priority, it really should start falling out on its own saying, look, these things are all high priority, but there's no way, because it's the amount of effort that it takes, there's no way one group can do it all. And it really should define itself whether it makes sense to combine or not combine. And my personal opinion is when we do that, I think we're going to really find it that we're going to say that there's just so much stuff to be done, and it's in a good amount of effort for each of these things that it just can't be done by one group efficiently or even to a decent job. So.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add though to the point of rec, and we haven't been able to focus on that perhaps as much as we would have liked to, but one exception I think was with the whole possibility of the sports stable project, when those of us who were on the committee at that time got thrown into a whole lot of discussions about indoor rec that were extremely urgent and emotional at times. And you know, we weren't totally prepared for that, but we did the best we could. And definitely we're going to have to do more of that going forward, particularly with the master plan coming through.
And it's not just the rec center, it's, you know, it's all the things that get added on that are stuff that we weren't planning on to get added on the year. We'll say the, I don't want to say the Riverbend, what was it called? Zone 3, the Zone 3 park, right? We spent a good amount of effort talking about that. There are several things like that we get added ad hoc, you know, that add to it. So,
yeah.
Actually, it's a good point. I think PROSTAC has historically been the organization that gets pointed to by the board to go solve, you know, the latest problem. You know, Wildflower is another great example of, you know, we got the land, we wanted to move forward on a park, and where do we go? We went to PROSTAC to help design it. So, you know, I think the other two examples are where, you know, PROSTAC put a lot of time in it and, you know, we sort of walked away, but with Wildflower, you know, I think the community came out with something that was pretty amazing. So, and I think if nothing else, that's been part of the challenge for PROSTAC to sort of stick to a specific charter, because the board has historically pulled you in different directions depending on what happens. I mean, who knows what's going to happen next year? Let's say someone comes along with a proposal for Town 15 that, you know, a lot of people like, and we've got to try to wrap our head around that. I'm just using that as an example. I got nothing, you know, I don't know anything about it, but you know, things like that will fall onto the plate, and I think PROSTAC's been historically nimble enough to you know, to work through those as they go.
I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens on the master plan also. Like, will it relieve some of the pressures on some of the work plan items that, you know, the group doesn't anticipate? I don't know, but it'll be an interesting, you know, whatever happens.
What is the feeling of the board, if you can speak for them, Neil, on the urgency of this? I think that in Ryan and my eyes, if the groups are going to be combined, it should be sooner than later, so that we can start doing things together. We can avoid, you know, coming up with work plans for next 2021 independently if it's really going to be one group. I mean, there's some things that fall away if we're going to be together. So if there's I guess if the board is going to say, hey, this is going to happen, it would be really nice to know that sooner than later. And if that's not the case, and there could be some, I guess I don't want to just delay the decision artificially, but like Allison pointed out with the master plan and some of these things in play right now, it also might be helpful to delay the decision to see how it would shake out a little bit as well.
So honestly, I don't think there's any specific impetus other than, two things happen. One is we bought CenturyLink and we spent, at least 12 million of the town's money, of the open space monies, to go do that. So as far as the original charter for OSAC, it's definitely changed. And then, relative to the two organizations, there are 5 empty seats. So if you're going to try to combine something, doing it at a time when there's a number of empty seats, this is probably the best time to evaluate it. However, I think the reality is what, at least a couple of board members, myself specifically, because I can only get inside my head. I think this has been, the last couple of weeks has been, really thinking through, well, what does this mean? It's easy to, have talked about this for the last month and said, yeah, they'll collaborate and they'll merge and it'll be fine. But the reality is there's a lot of things that both groups do or haven't done or want to do more of that we haven't been able to spend as much time on as we wanted. And I think there's going to be some benefit to maybe taking a step back, potentially take a step back and reassess. I like Susan's idea of the swim lanes, analogy. Take a step back and see, let's reestablish these two organizations, maybe rename them, and maybe that's the right way forward. Or, and maybe it's a joint meeting with the OSAC, PROSTAC folks to kind of sort through, prioritize the list based on what we have right now. Here's what PROSTAC does. Here's what OSAC does historically. Here's the overlap area. Here's where it might fit naturally. Maybe that can help sort it out. I don't know. I mean, but Todd, to your question, we don't have a deadline. We don't have a specific timeline. I think there's just, a couple of things conspired to make this, a time to think about it more than anything else.
And I would like to add food for thought in there that, combining at this stage when we're working our work plans for the year, we would end up missing at least a month or two because we would have to sit down and figure out, well, what work plan do we work to now, right? I mean, because there's 2 independent work plans that fill up the year. And some of the stuff that we're doing, especially with the PROST master plan, I would hate to lose any traction on that if we had to pause to try to figure out, well, where do we go from here?
Any other thoughts? Dan, you've heard other people suggest that maybe they don't think that combining is the best plan, and I heard you say that you did. Have you been swayed, or are you still in the camp of combining?
I'd still be in favor of doing a little more work toward what would combination look like? What would combination subcommittee and like reports look like, as opposed to the 2 separate committees? I mean, I see all the points that you're making behind them, but I think that, like, if you use the master plan for an example, how much of that are we really doing in our scheduled meetings? So far, I would say not very much. Like, if you're interested in the master plan, there was a chance to review all the applications and weigh in on that as part of a subcommittee. There was an option to go on the walking tour with them as a part of a subcommittee. And so, like, a lot of the activity that's happened so far has been outside of the meeting. I think we could do very similar things with any other topics that people had passion about. And so I wouldn't want to do it in a way that said, no, this person that has a lot of passion for a specific topic, you can't be a part of the committee. I wouldn't want to make that happen, but I'm not convinced that that's what would happen.
All right. Well, I think clearly we could make that happen. And to your point earlier about, hey, if there was a technology committee, Dan would like to be part of that. And if we were to collapse these 2 committees into one, and there were to be other opportunities for people to do things for the good of the town in different ways, being efficient, even though I brought up, hey, that's free labor, let's, use it. We don't want to abuse it. We still want to be efficient in that. And if there's ways of being efficient, by all means, I think we should. And so I think to your point of saying, hey, let's walk down that path a little further to say, hey, can we really make this happen? Is very valid.
Yeah, I guess what I would do is push back a little bit on that spreadsheet and say, do those things really need to be done every meeting? Or could they be done twice a year or once a quarter? Or could they be done with a summary that's sent out before the meeting that you read in the meeting, as opposed to a group discussion? Could they essentially be a consent agenda item if you use the terminology of the board, right? Like
Right.
something everyone has a chance to review, but you don't necessarily spend time talking about it.
Well, certainly there's a lot of efficiencies to be had. There's no doubt about that. And I guess, I don't know, Neil, I think you've gone sort of on both sides of this fence a little bit, and as we've talked through this together, I've seen that kind of change a little bit in your thinking. How much should we be focused on being as efficient as we can rather than having a little bit of, margin around the edges intentionally?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be honest. I mean, I think all of us recognize that government work is very different than how we do things in our real life. I think the challenge, for example, with the subcommittees, is the need to make them publicly noticed with an agenda, broadcast, and allow for public participation. So by definition, it's a meeting, right? So I know CAPS was doing subcommittee meetings at Whole Foods, and we had a lot of concern about what potential decisions were getting made. Well, they weren't making decisions. They were trying to have conversations and work forward. And then they would bring that back to, the main meetings. But it does create that sort of, well, if you're in the community and want to get engaged, how do you know what they're going to talk about? And it does make it more difficult relative to the other committees that we have in town. I'm not saying that the subcommittee mantra or the model can't work, but it does, it's not necessarily as easy as I think we would like it to be, or, the way that we would work, in our real jobs. Hey, let's just have an ad hoc meeting. Boom, let's go have it. With this, it's very different. But Todd, you did pick up something. I mean, or Dan, none of these things have to happen every single month. I think we can, through the sort of sorting out what are we doing, how much of this is a monthly thing, how much is a quarterly, how much is a twice a year. I think a lot of that needs to happen so that we sort of streamline a lot of what is. I don't want to call it peripheral, but less, regular. The trail rankings is something we want to continue to do, but maybe we change the cadence of some things so that, we tie it back to other, milestones. And I think through that, and I think this is part of that collaborative discussion with OSAC around, here's all the things that PROSTAC's doing. Here's what OSAC's been historically doing. Here's how, the combined entity could look. Or as we go through this, there's actually a whole lot of stuff that both groups can't do because they keep getting pulled in different directions by the board or by, something else. So it's another non-answer. I apologize. It's more of, I think this is not a simple discussion or a simple decision, and I think that's okay. And I don't want to presuppose an answer. I did, and I said, a merger makes the most sense. But the reality is what I've come to is I don't know that it does because I haven't actually seen, a cohesive, comprehensive list of what, the combined group would do or what the separated, sort of better organized groups would do, if they're sort of streamlining what it is that they do.
So what would the board like to see from us? Are you looking for a specific recommendation? Are you looking for us to continue to work this and work with Ryan and the OSAC folks and see what we can come up with over the course of the next few weeks or a month or something and give you a recommendation? What do we need to do?
At the end of the day, we would absolutely need a recommendation from both groups. PROSTAC says, we want to merge and here's the reasons why, or OSAC says we want to merge and here's the reasons why, or, PROSTAC thinks we should keep separate and here's a redefined, scope of what PROSTAC's going to do. None of that's going to happen in a vacuum. And it does mean, sort of a subcommittee meeting of OSAC and PROSTAC to sort through, what are we not doing? What are we doing? What would a combined entity look like? Or how does staying separate potentially work better for the town? And I think what I've realized just between this meeting and the OSAC meeting last week, we're both kind of talking about it in our own silos, and this can't be done that way. Because if we're talking about a merger, you have to talk to the other side. You have to talk to the other silo, right? In terms of what it is that they're doing and how this is going to work. And, I think we've approached it probably, the way that, we always would. It's like, just go do it and solve it. But we didn't say, hey, have a joint meeting and solve it. And I think that's really the starting point for a lot of this. I think both groups have had a conversation and everybody's laid out a handful of concerns, both through merger and non-merger. And I think the next step from my perspective is, a joint meeting, so the two silos can talk and decide what actually makes the most sense. And maybe out of that, it's a recommendation or a part of a recommendation that the board then has to decide on the right direction. It'd be great if, all, would we say 11 people, 12 people can come up with a unanimous decision on here's what's going to happen. Probably not going to happen. But if we can nail down, some direction on what the majority of people feel comfortable with, I think that's reasonable.
So I will talk to Ryan and see about setting up a joint meeting with all of us together. And I'll send out some times that we come up with that seem to make sense. I guess I'll send around to this group a sign up, and if you can just put in your available times, probably not next week, but the week after that, then we can get together and at least have a discussion.
And I appreciate that, Todd. I don't want to suggest that my suggestion is the only way to go. It's just more a reflection of what I've seen in the last couple of weeks. But if
Right.
PROSTAC today had said, what, we're going to merge, and here's all the 9 reasons why, I would 100% support that. So if the 4 of you, even though you don't have quorum, want to make a non-decision to just say merge or not merge, then we can absolutely do that. But if you want to take a step back and sort of have that discussion with OSAC, it's a reasonable approach, and I'm fully in support of either one.
Right. Well, right now, at least what I'm hearing, there's not enough of us to vote on this, but what I'm seeing is 3 people that probably are leaning towards maintaining a separate structure, and Dan who's leaning towards, combined group. But I'm not sure, any of us are really staunchly opposed to the other if a good solution came up in front of us. Is that fair to say for you guys? Or like Corbett and Susan, are you, if we sat down and came up with this beautiful way of merging things and everyone buys off on it, would that be something that you'd be in just general opposition to, or not?
I would not be in opposition to it. I was kind of thinking through some of the potential difficulties as some of the members of OSAC were describing it and thinking, oh my gosh, yeah, so many different reports and discussion points and hours. But if, again, to your point, if something beautiful could be worked out, I would certainly be in favor of it.
Yeah, and what I said earlier, facts and figures set you free. I mean, sure, I'm not one way or the other right now. My suspicion is, just based on my experience for the last 5 years, is that I would be hard to believe without the data in front of me that the 2 groups could combine and get all that stuff done, in a way that should be done as a single group. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. And maybe when we start looking at roles and responsibility and an amount of effort and prioritization of all this, like Dan said, some of these lower priority stuff, you could, reduce the, instead of, reduce the cadence of. We start looking at that, and maybe it absolutely makes sense that it's a single group with a couple subcommittees, whatever. But let's start looking at, I think the first thing we have to do, though, is really start laying out and looking at what are the roles and responsibilities currently per the charter of each group. Do those things still make sense? Are any of those things OBE because we don't have open space fund for the next 20 years? Are there any new things that should be added to the charters that really, we find ourselves doing, even though it's never been in the charter, like looking at rec centers or things like that, that really, maybe not specifically said, but things like that. So let's map it all out, take a look, and see what it suggests we do.
And if the group decides to go ahead with a joint meeting, all we need is a quick agenda, and I can throw it up on the website and publish it. It's really easy.
Okay, so I will work with Ryan to see if they would like to put a joint meeting together. Collectively, are we in favor of doing that and having a big group powwow? I can see it being a healthy step. I'm questioning how useful it might be. There's so many opinions. I think that's hard to make some of these types of decisions by committee. And sometimes there needs to be some clarity given, and then we figure out how to do it.
Yeah, actually, Todd, you're absolutely right. And maybe it should be phrased as a work session. And, some work in advance is the spreadsheet that you sort of put up on the screen, and sort of making sure that everybody's got that, everyone's reviewed it, had a chance to sort of, opine on it. Because I think, everybody should be coming to these meetings fully prepared, having read the charters, read the historic work plans, read the scope of what everyone's been doing, so that they're actually approaching it from a perspective of equal footing. Because otherwise we might have a train wreck of a lot of opinions that aren't necessarily based on the actual defined scope of what everyone's been doing and has been and should be doing.
Right.
And that might take a little bit of pre-work from you and Ryan to just kind of harmonize that and put a fairly concrete agenda together, and then swing that gavel on
For sure.
who can and can't talk.
Well, I think we also can put together, what would it look like with subcommittees if I can just sit down with Ryan. I think we can put that together. Like our best guesses. How do we do this? How would we break things up? And the same thing for separating things. Where would we draw lines into two separate groups, and have some targets to shoot at for the larger group? Because I think going in with a blank sheet of paper with a large group rarely gets you anywhere. And so at least if we have a couple of targets to shoot at, we can poke holes in them. We can fall in love with them, whatever. But I certainly can work with Ryan to get that together, and then just have us sit down and kind of see where everyone's heads go.
One quick interesting tidbit, with OSAC, when they would do their work plans for the year, they people volunteer for all the work plan items, and so they have racked and stacked in the past by like, hey, Susan, you're really interested in this. Oh, Corbett, you are too. Okay, you guys have that, and then just like the trail plan where everybody kind of individually ranks by themselves and sends it into the one person for the final meeting, a lot of stuff is done that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it'd be interesting to sit down. I haven't gone through the detail level of trying to say, hey, if we were going to put this together as subcommittees or the whole, how would that actually happen? Attaching names to it, preliminary, like, do we have enough bodies to cover this and things like that. I need to go through that exercise just for my own sake, if nothing else. And not that it's good or correct ideas, but like, it'll at least give a first blush to, can this be done? Can it not be done? Both ways. And everyone else, please feel free. Take a stab at things and send it my way if you want to, because we're really looking for, I think, at least what I'm hearing, is there's some emotions involved in all this, but I think everyone wants to do the right thing. And so maybe there's some ideas that we're not really thinking about. And so if things come to mind, by all means, you either have the data that you need to look at it yourself, or I can provide it, or someone can. But don't be bashful about digging in and trying to put ideas together yourselves too. But I will put together 2 ideas and work with Ryan to do that. And I will work with him also to get together a joint meeting for all of us to sit down after we have that done. And we can take a first stab at things and see if we can't put together a consensus with the entire group on what to tell the board is our recommendation. Because once again, for at least if I'm the board and I could get a recommendation from PROSTAC and a recommendation from OSAC regarding a sidewalk in Autry Park, I would just as soon have them get together and give me one recommendation. And so at least from my perspective, I will do my best to work with the Ryan and OSAC folks for us to collectively put a recommendation out there rather than 2, because I don't know what good 2 does.
Hey, and one thing, I was gonna say, one thing I plan to do this weekend is I plan to take both charters and literally just start mapping out roles and responsibility, and at least for the PROSTAC, based on my experience, try to do perceived effort and ranking of what stuff is in there and then what stuff is not in there, and then try to do the same thing at least for what's in the charter for OSAC and say, hey, this is what's in your charter. Is there anything missing? And then I can send that out to you guys after I do it. Hopefully I can get this done this weekend. And then you guys can at least take a look at that, and you can, add to it if you think that the level of effort is higher or lower, or priority is higher or lower, and then we can at least have that as a going in.
That would be helpful, Corbett. I will create a new folder on Dropbox and give you guys all permissions to it, so you can drop stuff in there and edit it and whatever you like to do. If we can, maybe if we can do this all in the same location, it'd be helpful for us to just see who's done what.
I guess I would just like to add, though, I really like Neil's idea about positioning this as a work session and not kind of jump the gun too much with some of the OSAC members who have been working on things that frankly we're not as familiar with, like wildlife stuff, and assume that, yes, we're going to march forward and here's all of our spreadsheets, you guys. I think we need to be careful to treat it as a discussion, a collaborative discussion, and not we're going to finish this tonight and get it over with, because I'm sure we won't.
Quick note on that, the wildlife outdoor education programs is a lot like the recreation programs. We bring it to you, we tell you what's going on, we say, hey, this one's kind of dwindling, do you have any ideas? And then maybe we create that. So, you know, it sounds really complicated, but it's a contractor, and she's great. So
we don't have to worry about doing that, is what you're saying.
well, it's just not as intimidating as maybe it feels, you know, because it is new, but it kind of just marches in line with some of the other things that we do on the PROSTAC side, you know, like programming, you know, soccer camps and swimming programs and things like that.
I guess I wasn't just thinking of wildlife education, but also just kind of wildlife issues in general and interactions that maybe happen with Boulder County Open Space or people like that. I just get the sense from OSAC that they've been more involved in those conversations in the past, but I could be wrong.
So from a staff standpoint, Allison, how does that voice get into this discussion best? In terms of difficulty and added work, or, you know, this is easier or harder, but also what is better, what's missing? Is there a way that we can sort of poll you guys and get that information in the mix as well?
I'm sure Leslie and I, as the two liaisons, will attend the meeting, or at least one of us will attend it. You know, I could probably say, depending on the time of year or what a staff member has been tasked with for a committee, I mean, I would go as far to say maybe 20% or 25% at any given time of, you know, a workload, you know, gathering data or loose ends, or working with a consultant with this group and that group and that group, or, you know, just trying to make sure communication is flowing in all the different channels, and, you know, creation of documents and publishing and website maintenance, and, you know, there's multifacets. So at any given, you know, it could be less, it could be more, but I would say probably maybe 20% of your 100% is, you know, a good estimate.
So I guess what I'm hoping to get is some really honest feedback to us on what we're not doing that you think we should be doing, to put in the mix of or what we're doing that we shouldn't be. But like, what is missing in all of this? Are we missing pieces that we as the committees don't see that you as staff do see when we're trying to figure this out? I guess I just don't want to miss that piece of the puzzle.
Gosh, I feel like communication between the two committees, you know, can be difficult because everybody's not there at the same time to talk about all the different items, and, you know, the dynamics of those discussions can sometimes, you know, be pulling in two different directions, which I think is normal. But I think it's also because of like miscommunication, or maybe people don't have the time together to sort things out better.
I get the impression that there's been some friction maybe between the two groups over the course of time. I don't know all of what that's been, but I get that impression. And when I started meeting together with the OSAC folks earlier this year and trying to do joint recommendations on like Town 15 or joint trail rankings and things like that. When we sat down and went through that, kind of the collective consensus was, oh, that wasn't nearly as hard as we thought it was going to be. And so I don't know all of the history on that, but it seems like maybe some of those things we can make go more smoothly than has happened in the past.
Oh, I totally agree. And I feel like these two groups currently, as to compared when I started 6 years ago, it's very different and the climate is very different. And I think there was a lot of push and pull with especially like trails, who gets trails, who gets to decide about trails. So I think like the groups have been doing great. And, a lot of people that were on the committees for a long amount of time and things had been done a certain way, has evolved and it's a little bit different than it had been before.
Okay, well, anyway, it seems like at least what I have seen, maybe I'm just naive in all of this, but what I've seen is that we have groups of people that actually want to work together well, and it's not a bad thing. So that's at least a good starting point, I think.
I'd like to just add one more thing. So, while we're thinking about this, historically, we've always been at the discretion of the board to help out the board. But one of the things we could consider as well is what can we do in terms of scope, if there is additional scope to be added potentially to help pros out. I mean, what can we do, Allison, to make your guys' life a little bit easier if we find that we might have a little bit more bandwidth by level loading each of the different groups? So think about that and maybe offer a suggestion there too.
Okay, any other final thoughts on this before we move on? Okay, looking ahead, 1500 Colton Road project. You got an update for us, Allison? I see a fence around the property and they've been doing some things, but where are we at?
So right now, some of the demolition on the interior spaces is being done, and interior walls, the ceiling, and some of the non-essential steel structures are being removed. So there's some interesting stuff going on over there.
And
I actually have a meeting tomorrow to see what's happening. So I'm kind of excited to go check it out.
any things that have changed in terms of things that have gotten thrown out for cost reasons or anything like that from when we've last seen this? Or are we pretty much on track with where the last was that we were shown?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that's been thrown out. But as always, like the milling work will be re-looked at for cost savings. Sometimes structures that are retaining potential over 3-foot drop off, it's kind of like the milling work, where there can be cost savings, and some of that will always be looked at, and finishes and things like that. But as of right now, I don't think there's been anything specific. It's just been more general that, if some cost savings needs to be done, usually it's in those areas.
Right. And as far as us planning for like programming and things like that for the space, we are going to open the doors on what date? If you had to guess.
I think that the date we were told when we signed the agreement to do the renovation was April of next year. So that's around about when it's supposed to be done.
Okay.
And the good thing about that is the master plan hopefully will be done. Yeah. And they're looking, like right now, we're entering every single program that we had last year. Just because of COVID this year, the data for this year isn't your typical data. So, we're entering in all the programming and the numbers and the revenues and all of that stuff. So I'm sure some recommendations will be coming out of that, which will be nice.
Any other questions about Colton? Going once, going twice. Okay, pickleball. Is pickleball there yet?
It is not there yet, but it's happening. It's going. We received some of the final soil sampling information that we needed for substructure for that project because the soils in that area, and we're anticipating early fall that it should be completed, and we have included some benching on one side of the courts and another one of the picnic table sized shade structures that I think there's three other ones in that area, the dog park and the dirt pump track. So there'll be, I think, 2 more shade structures, one on the opposite side from the benches at the pickleball courts and one that's kind of more for skate park area use that
So
we rolled into that project.
The one that was kind of undefined, that's going to be towards the skate park?
I think so. I think it's been intended that, we had a lot of feedback from parents of some of the kiddos that are using that park that shade would be great. And because the pickleball court, we had that budget and we thought that we could include another shade structure in that. It's just a smaller one that was kind of what was going on with that.
Okay. Any other pickleball questions? Okay, we are down to the 3 sentences for the email blast. Have you already done that, Dan, like you usually do?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I
some.
just assumed.
So here's what I have. I said the members discussed results of the community survey and feedback regarding additional crusher fine trails. Members reviewed the status of PROST master plan and discussed the latest meeting with consultants. Members discussed the possibility of combining PROSTAC and OSAC groups.
Okay.
Anything else you want to add there?
I don't know. I might add that we're going to continue the discussion with OSAC on the last one.
Okay.
Everyone good with those, or would you like them changed?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Okay, anything else we missed, guys?
Good job running the meeting for your first meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Todd.
Hey, it's only 9:15 and we're done.
Yeah.
I thought a couple of these things could run really long, so I'm glad it's only 9:15. Thanks, everyone, and be on the lookout for the where are my notes here? Spreadsheet with the park, so we can sign up and go around and get those things nailed off. And then I will send some things around about a meeting with OSAC and some times that we can see if we can zero in on that, and a folder that you'll all have access to on Dropbox. And so I'll get those things done here in the next day, and then we'll move forward. And if that's it, we are adjourned. Have a good night, everyone, and we'll talk to you later.
Wow, Corbett,
Thanks.
it's dark back there.
Turn your lights on, man.
No, this is my strategy. As it gets darker and darker, you guys can see less and less. And then
Good
you have no
strategy.
idea.